So we've spent most of last month discussing the specifics of the Battle of Reach, which occurred in July and August of 2552. And I figured today we could take a little bit of a look at a battle that was happening at the same time in almost the same location. Today, let's discuss the Battle of Tribute. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So when Covenant forces arrived in the Epsilon Eridani system in late July 2552, their objectives were clear and simple: to assault the planet Reach. But they found when they arrived in the Epsilon Eridani system that there were multiple human colonies within that system. And within the first few weeks of the Battle of Reach kicking off, these other colonies soon found themselves under an assault as well. But most notable of these colonies was the world of Tribute. So today let's talk about the Siege of Tribute, and its sort of interesting and lengthy history. Now, we don't know exactly when the Siege of Tribute began. We know that Covenant forces arrived on Tribute at some point right around the same time they arrived at Reach, so either late July or early August. But by the time the Siege of New Alexandria was kicking off in the second half of August over on Reach, a massive similar series of sieges began on Tribute. Now, Tribute itself is a pretty significant colony. It's a major economic hub and a center for commerce within the UNSC, having a fairly large population, and while it is overshadowed by its nearby neighbor of Reach, it's still a very significant human colony. So for it to fall under siege by Covenant forces was significant, but the UNSC was a little distracted at this time fighting the Battle of Reach. Much of the Battle of Tribute played out initially like the Battle of Reach, with Covenant forces carrying out minor scouting missions before carrying out a much larger assault that primarily targeted civilian population centers. The first of these major population centers targeted by Covenant forces would be the Battle of Jrob, which would be notable for having some of the most significant fighting on Tribute during the course of the battle. It's also worth noting that during this particular part of the Battle of Tribute, the 105th Shock Trooper Division was deployed, and this would be some of the heaviest fighting that unit would ever see. But that fighting wasn't in vain. The forces of the 105th would actually hold off Covenant forces long enough for much of the city's population to be evacuated. The same couldn't be said about the planet's capital of Caspa. Caspa was the second major population center hit by Covenant forces when they arrived on Tribute, and it would see a much longer battle with a series of smaller engagements taking place throughout the city, throughout late August and even well into September. But by mid-September, as Installation 04's true presence became apparent to the Covenant, religious turmoil pretty quickly began within Covenant ranks, and the prophets of truth and regret began consolidating their forces. Meanwhile, on Tribute, chaos still reigned as a large glassing campaign was carried out, and Caspa was square in the sights of advancing Covenant forces. However, as this turmoil surrounding Installation 04, and eventually surrounding the Great Schism, grew larger and larger, Covenant forces became disinterested in engaging the humans on Tribute. After all, their primary target in Epsilon Eridani had already fallen, Reach, and by this point, the Battle of Earth was starting to kick off. So Covenant forces had a lot on their hands, and right about this time, the Great Schism kicked off when elites and brutes began fighting one another. As a result, the Covenant forces in orbit over Tribute quickly fell into chaos, and the ground forces soon followed. The end result was that the elites teamed up with the humans, and the planet of Tribute ultimately never fully fell to the Covenant. However, it was almost a certainty. In the last month of the Battle of Tribute, the planet was nearly defenseless, with human forces being worn down until there wasn't much left. The only reason this battle didn't end in a firm Covenant victory at some point in September was the discovery of Halo and the beginning of the religious collapse of the Covenant. Ultimately, Tribute's fall is often overshadowed by the events of Reach, and by the time it had really shifted in favor of the UNSC, the focus of history was turned elsewhere. Earth was under siege by Covenant forces, and the fate of all life within the galaxy now hung in the balance as the true nature of the Halo arrays was revealed. Still, I think the Battle of Tribute is an interesting reminder that while we may remember key colony worlds and each of the systems that fell under siege by the Covenant throughout the Human-Covenant War, there were other worlds with other human settlements on them that were completely overshadowed by major battles like the battles of Harvest and Arcadia. that are still worth discussing. At the end of the day, Tribute actually was one of the first human colonies to begin rebuilding, since it hadn't completely fallen and a large portion of the civilian population remained on Tribute and was actually there to begin the process of rebuilding the economic hub they once called home. And after the end of the war, Tribute would be one of the first colonies to get back on its feet in some sense. But it would maintain the scars of the battles on Tribute, and those battles went hand in hand with the battles on its neighbor, Reach. If you'd like to learn about the fall of Reach, I'll leave a link up here to a video on the Siege of New Alexandria, the moment when the tide really shifted in favor of the Covenant, and the fall of the biggest human colony in the Epsilon Eridani system became inevitable. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think it was smart for the Covenant to divide their forces in the Epsilon Eridani system between Reach and Tribute, or do you think it would have made more sense for them to focus all of their forces on Reach and wait for Reach to fall completely before engaging other human settlements within the system? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Halo, Star Wars, or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.